All right, what's up, y'all, and welcome to another Teaching Tuesday revamped. Today we're going to do another verbal lesson, sans guitar, and this is something that I have wanted to talk about for a while, but I finally just put a little bit of thought into it so I could articulate it properly, and today we're going to talk about 5 of the best jazz guitar players. This is a little bit of a specific piece of that, in that we're going to talk about kind of earlier jazz guitar players, like the first electric jazz guitar players circa 40s, 50s, 60s, the inception of bebop jazz guitar. I think I'm going to make another video or maybe 2 talking about different styles and different more contemporary ones. In terms of before that, like pre-electric guitar, at least, I'm not going to really touch on that because that's not really my area of expertise, and you could probably listen to somebody who's more well-versed in that style. So we're going to start from the electric guitar. And just a little bit of criteria. These are some of my favorites. People who have had the most influence on me, and I think have had the most impact and influence on the state of jazz and the state of guitar, the state of music, and who have had like kind of a lasting impact into today, because we can kind of see who stood the test of time and whatnot. So without further ado, we talked about electricity, the electric guitar, so there's really no better starting point than the great Charlie Christian. So we're talking about the late 30s, early 40s here. He died pretty young. He died at the age of 25. So that was in 1942, and I think that was tuberculosis. So we don't have actually that many recordings of Charlie Christian. That being said, there is a kind of iconic box set, or at least when I was growing up, I had it in that box set format, and speaking in terms of CDs and whatnot, but that's still available as a compilation, and it's the Benny Goodman Sextet featuring Charlie Christian. Has songs like Flying Home and 7 Come 11 and those sorts of, a lot of Benny Goodman, Lionel Hampton tunes. So this group was also famous for breaking the color barrier, one of the first groups to do that around that time. There was also Teddy Wilson, a black pianist in the group. Benny Goodman is obviously white. So but I'm going to note this as like a great recording of him, and I'm also going to cite a specific track that if you're, interested in transcribing or even just listening to a lot, but definitely this is like a famous transcription making the rounds in the jazz community in the past several decades, but his solo on Rose Room, which is similar changes as In a Mellow Tone, is a really iconic solo and gives you kind of an insight into his vocabulary and the way he approached. It's very guitaristic, and I find that like people who, especially in the earlier ages of guitar, play more guitaristic, and you can definitely see this with certain types of like box patterns and very like visual guitar shapes in terms of soloing. And this to me is kind of like a pre-bebop style. So like bebop was this is around the inception of bebop, and Charlie Christian was rubbing shoulders and going to jam sessions with bebop musicians like Dizzy Gillespie and Monk and whatnot. But his language, his vocabulary on the guitar was not quite bebop, in my opinion. You also have another live recording where he is actually playing at like a sort of jam session at Minton's with Dizzy Gillespie, and I'm trying to find the name of that record right now, and I can't, but I will. There it is. Actually, no, that's not it. All right, I'll include it later in the YouTube description. Anyways, we're going to move on to number 2, somebody who I think is actually very closely related to Charlie Christian in terms of the lineage and in terms of influence. I think he would be the first to say it. I mean, not now because he's not around, but Anyways, I'm talking about Barney Kessle. Barney Kessle was around for much longer. I think he lived into the 2000s, so we do have a huge breadth of his work. But he was around playing as a sideman with like people from like Billie Holiday, and Oscar Peterson, and even like doing a lot of pop music around that time. He was in a group which was called the Wrecking Crew, which is a group of studio musicians that played on tons of records throughout the, I think, 60s and 70s. And I think he's even on a Beach Boys recording. I think he's on Pet Sounds, but I'm going to have to double check that one. But I'm going to share with you my favorite recording of his, and that is the Poll Winners' Ride Again, which features Shelly Manne and Ray Brown. I think this is 1958 or something like that. But a lot of people are familiar with the Poll Winners' first album, but this is the Poll Winners' Ride Again, their second album, which I think is better. I'll just say that. I mean, they're all great, but this is kind of just, I think the magic really happened in this recording. If you don't know, the Poll Winners was just a group that was kind of put together. It was the people who won the polls of the day. It was the Downbeat poll. The Playboy had a jazz poll, believe it or not, at the time, and there's one other one I can't remember the name of, but through these like people who got the who won the poll on their instrument, they made a band, and that was the Poll Winners: Ray Brown, Shelly Manne, Barney Kessle. So that Poll Winners' Ride Again album is, I just think, the best example of his playing, especially in terms of like the inception of the guitar trio. That was really a new kind of instrumentation, a new sound at that time, and I think that kind of like paved the way for the guitar trio instrumentation. Barney is just like a master at, to me, arranging and really comping for himself, making arrangements within that trio, and intros and endings, and just having like a sound that really made it so that you didn't miss the piano, a sound that really gelled and blended with that instrumentation. So definitely Poll Winners' Ride Again. I'm not even going to say another one because that one really does it for me. Okay, number 3, we are going to talk about also somebody very heavily influenced by Charlie Christian, and that is the great Wes Montgomery. So that's probably one of the most popular names in jazz guitar, but it's for a reason. It's not in vain. So Wes Montgomery also. We didn't live quite as long as Barney Kessle. I think he died in the late 60s, but we still have a good amount of recordings of him, so it's hard to narrow it down. But I'm going to cite 2 records of his, and that is Smokin' at the Half Note, which is kind of just a totally iconic recording with Paul Chambers, Jimmy Cobb, and Wynton Kelly. And I think that's around like 1961, something like that, 62 maybe. And but that, that's a live recording, so there's a lot of talking and crazy stuff going on in the background. And I'm going to cite a specific solo. That's his solo on No Blues. It's a very long solo, and despite the name, it actually is a blues. But there's so many iconic just like riffs and licks in that solo that have just like stood the test of time and that people still cite today. It's become part of the jazz guitar vernacular. So definitely that solo, if you have the stomach to really shed it, or you can just take bits and pieces of it. And the other one I'm going to mention is Boss Guitar, and that we talked about the inception and the popularization of the guitar trio, guitar, bass, and drums. This is kind of like the inception of the other guitar trio, the organ, guitar, drums trio. And this is a great example of that. We have Melvin Rhyne and Jimmy Cobb on bass guitar. It's early 60s, I think maybe 60, 61 on Riverside, I think. Anyways, this is just kind of like perfect playing, in my opinion. It's just like crisp to the T. Everyone's on their A game, and it's a perfect example of like Wes's virtuosity and his one of the best guitar sounds I've ever heard, and fluidity, playing up tempos, ballads. It's just a masterpiece, in my opinion. So Boss Guitar. Okay, now we're gonna move on to somebody originally from the Detroit area, but now who's still alive and residing in my hometown of Los Angeles, California. None other than the great Kenny Burell. Kenny Burell also had a similar trajectory to Barney Kessle in the way I mentioned before. He was on just tons of studio recordings and is just like one of the most recorded guitar players, definitely one of the most recorded jazz guitar players of all time. So it is kind of hard to narrow this down, but I'm going to mention a few records of his. So we have Midnight Blue, which is kind of, I think, his best-selling record, I want to say. The album art is actually like iconic. You might just like see it in random places in pop culture, but that's kind of one of the best just jazz guitar records in general, in my opinion. There are a few trio tracks on it, but it also has Stanley Turrentine on it and has congas on it. But it still kind of gives you kind of a roadmap for how to navigate a traditional jazz guitar sound with a piano-less group. And it also kind of embodies like a very bluesy sort of like soul jazz thing that is like really accessible and some of my favorite music. So I'm going to mention Midnight Blue, and then also going back to that trio format, guitar, bass, and drums, we have Live at the Vanguard, and that is some incredible trio playing kind of along the lines of that Barney Kessle style, but Kenny does it in a different way. It's not so West Coast, it's not so hyper arranged, it's a little more loose. We have Roy Haynes on drums and Richard Davis on bass, I think 58, and I heard stories that Maxine or whoever was at the Vanguard was very skeptical of like having a piano-less group, but they pulled it off, and I think they definitely did. And then I'm gonna have to give a third one here, so that's Kenny Burrell and John Coltrane, just probably one of the best jazz albums of all time, and that's the one that actually initially drew me in terms of Kenny Burrell's playing. And we got PC on bass, Paul Chambers, Jimmy Cobb, and Tommy Flanagan on piano. That's just like a brilliant work of art. Kenny Burrell is known as a very lyrical, melodic player. He also has a very bright sound, so it's kind of a very a big contrast from somebody like Wes, who has like a darker sound. And he is somebody who definitely embodied that bebop language on the guitar. Wes, I would say, kind of had his own language that was like derivative from Charlie Christian and bebop, but different. Barney Kessle and Kenny, I think, did have a more bebop-y language. They were really coming out of the horn players, especially Barney, but definitely Kenny. I mean, Kenny might have been a little more guitaristic, but he's definitely coming from that bebop sound. And then number 5, we cannot have this list without mentioning the great Grant Green, kind of known as like a real single line sort of horn player-esque guitar player. Somebody like Wes, somebody like Barney, they're playing a lot of chords. Grant Green was really kind of almost like the Miles Davis of the guitar, like very lyrical, kind of had like a very distinct sound, especially in terms of tone. George Benson is said to have witnessed him turning the mids on the amp all the way up and everything else all the way down, or something like that. But he has a very bright sound, very lyrical player. Also definitely coming out of bebop, like 100%, but like in a more bluesy, kind of soulful way. And especially in terms of transcribing, I would say he's a great person for guitar players who are just getting into bebop to transcribe, because he really kind of like, I don't want to say waters down, but he simplifies a lot of the bebop language into a very digestible, like accessible, easy to play way on the guitar. And then In terms of records, this is kind of tough. I'm just going to give my favorite record, and that's going to be I Wanna Hold Your Hand, which has Elvin Jones, Larry Young, and Hank Mobley. It's in the early 60s Blue Note record, and that was one of the records that got me into jazz guitar, so I'm going to cite that one. There's also a lot of other ones. There's Street of Dreams, there's the quartet records with Sonny Clark, so those are maybe a close second. But I Wanna Hold Your Hand, for me, is the top one for him. And yeah, I think that's about it. We did number 5. As I said, I may do a follow-up video. We may talk about some more contemporary players, I guess, depending on how this video does and your feedback. So let me know if you're interested in that. And I will be putting this list not on YouTube, but I'll be going back to the Patreon, and I'm gonna you can see this list in a Word document or PDF format. And I'm gonna note all the honorable mentions and all the solos, so you can have that like a physical or digital copy of that to help guide you through your jazz guitar journey. But yeah, thanks again, guys, for tuning in, and hope you guys found this video helpful. If you did, smash that like button, subscribe, share it with your friends, do all that good stuff. Otherwise, I'll see you next Tuesday.